This is a conversation in the frame of the Space Renaissance conversations that the Space Renaissance Academy is dealing in order to compare different visions for our future, the future of our civilization in 200 years from now. I am Adriano Autino, the president of Space Renaissance International, and you are?
And I am Steve Wolfe, the Deputy Executive Director for SpaceCom and the author of The Obligation, a philosophical exploration of why humanity has been so passionate about settling and exploring outer space.
Excellent. So, we took the idea of these conversations from a book, or better, a series of books that were written by James Corey. Well, James Corey is in the reality is two authors. They are two authors that choose to sign themselves with this pseudonym, James Corey. So the story is developing in 200 years from now, and yeah, it was also made a TV series called The Expanse from these books. And the stories describes a situation where the humanity colonized the solar system. They are settled on Mars. Mars has its own government, and it is the second power of the solar system. The first one is Earth, governed by the United Nations. And there is a third entity called the Alliance of the External Planets, that is not quite a government, is more like an anarchist association of different communities that, of course, they try to survive on small moons, on the moons of Jupiter, and on big asteroids, and anything that can be adapted for human living. And well, there is let me say a space economy going ahead. Private companies go to take icebergs from the rings of Saturn and pull them to supply water and oxygen to the different communities that are living on the different celestial bodies. The social situation is complex and critical, because the external communities consider the internal planet as exploiters, and they feel to be discriminated from the internal planets, because they are also physiologically different, because they grew up in an environment with a low gravity. Therefore, they are tall and slim, and if they go to Mars or Earth, they cannot stand, because they are too weak. So there are yes, this kind of differences make people to be well, maybe the internal planets to be racist, and in the respect to the external communities, and the external communities to be very much feeling to fight against this supremacy. And okay, what in general terms on the history, I can say that the books are very good. In my opinion, this is mature science fiction, is what I call post-dystopian science fiction, because we we are maybe coming out from 40 years of dystopian science fiction in which science and technology were always presented like evil, because they destroyed the nature of this planet and a lot of this kind of things, coming from the green, radical green ideology. And so in this work of James Corey, we can see that finally human intelligence is again presented as a value. Of course, in a more mature way, because we are no more writing the histories of our beloved authors like Heinlein and Asimov and Branner, also Le Guin, and all this kind of authors that wrote their beautiful stories 50, 60 years ago. So the history of today, they are aware of all what is the complexity, the increased complexity and everything. But however, I can see in this work something new, something that could be a new hope in the future, and a new faith in human intelligence in general terms. And of course, the TV series is a little bit more, how can I say, space western, okay? More conflicts and violence and these kind of things. But however, the characters are the main characters, James Holden and his girlfriend. They are good people. They are, I think, they are humanist, and in their action that are also some naive actions sometimes, because James Holden exposes himself in very strange situations, but he always does it for the sake of the people, because he feels that the people deserve to know the truth of what is going on, and that the people should be allowed to decide themselves what it is better and what it is worse, and not manipulated by the big politicians, etc. So with this kind of spirit, James Holden always find himself in very strange and critical situation, where of course very, very dangerous for himself and for his crew, etc. Well, however, the questions, of course, I am seeing this history from a sociological point of view, from an anthropological point of view, from the point of view of the settler, talking about your characters in the book that your book that I'm reading. Very, very interesting, the obligation. So I wonder why after this big development, because if we think that solar system was colonized at this degree, we should have had a very, very big industrial revolution, a very big growth, cultural and economical growth, because they had to build spacecrafts and infrastructures and a lot of things, and the science and the technology should be advanced very much. So it is difficult for me to understand why Earth has 30 billion inhabitants. That means that the demographic growth continued on Earth, while we space advocates could think that if the frontier will be open, the demographic growth will continue outside Earth, mainly. So we don't know if it will stop on Earth or not. However, for sure, the diaspora should favor a growth in the bigger niche, in the big ecological niche, because this is what all natural species do. When they accede to a bigger niche, they grow in this niche, not in the old environment. So
Right.
this is my first question.
About population.
Yeah, about population and about the fact that on Earth, the majority of these 30 billion people are unemployed.
Yeah.
And they live with a pure subsistence salary. Is a
Yeah.
government
Well,
salary.
if I could just sort of jump in on that point, actually, very interesting, because that's a piece of it that I've been very intrigued by. But let me just say from at the beginning that, full disclosure, I've not read the books, but I am a huge fan of the television series. So I have not. Before I got your email inviting me, I had already seen all the episodes. I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any surprise as to why the series is hugely popular. So it's one of the most, if not the most popular science fiction shows on television right now across the board. And I think the reason is because it does have that Star Trek quality, right? Star Trek was about, what is the future going to look like 300 years from now if we remain to be a technologically developing society that can resolve some of its core and basic issues. Now, what makes the Expanse an interesting show is that it very much highlights the negative side of human interaction, the political side, how even in space there are factions that are created, the natural human tendency of having an us versus them mentality. So the Martians see the Earth as the enemy, the Earth sees the Martians and the Belters as the enemy, and so forth. And the tenants, and there's a greed element too, right? So there are some people that are going to take advantage of populations to benefit themselves. But at the same, like on Earth, you also have the heroes, right? So you have the Holden character that really wants to do good for all. And so he's remarkable, and it's going to be interesting to see how his character plays out, because you see him as being sort of the glue that's going to that holds all these different factions together, the Martians, the Earthers, and the Belters. And hopefully the resolution will be a peaceful one as it concludes. Don't tell me the way the book ends. So, I want to wait for that myself.
No. I just read 3 books. I think there are more than 3, and I still have to buy the other ones.
But it's interesting though. Just now, getting to your point about the question about a huge swath of the population is basically just receiving money from the government to live, and they don't really have jobs and so forth, mainly because of the the economic structure as it is at that time, and given the size of the population. But what's very interesting, what's going on right now, I mean, there are people that are very seriously talking about a guaranteed basic income. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this.
Yes, they are talking in Italy too about that.
In Italy about it, I think there are experiments in Norway or Sweden. We're doing experiments with a basic income in Silicon Valley right now. So the notion here, which is fascinating and is very relevant to the story, it's saying that can we give, say, the general, everybody in the population that earns under like $100,000, give everybody in the population a living wage, period, right? Say $1,000,
Yeah.
whatever it is, $1,000, $1,500 a month, every adult. And with that resources, they automatically are at a basic level, a basic living level. And on top of that, any job that they get on top of that is just extra. So they don't lose any money if they get a job.
Yeah.
And that's been one of the problems with our social network here in the United States, is that, yeah, I'm on social welfare, but if I get a job, then I can't. If I get a job, then I lose those welfare benefits. So I might as well just stay on those welfare benefits. So it's this terrible cycle that they're on, that they can't really. Many people have a hard time getting up out of that dependency. So anyway, I don't want to get into that whole social conversation.
No. I would like to add something to your consideration, because they are very interesting. I think that it is another thing that is surprising is that in 200 years, with such a big development, they are still considering to give a mere survival subside to unemployed people that will only allow people to satisfy their basic Maslow level. If you think about the Maslow hierarchy of needs,
Yeah.
So, is it possible that 200 years after our age, that was the struggle, the class struggle, the Marxism, and all these kind of things, nobody was still able to think about a better utopia with respect to the classical Marxist utopia that was from everybody according to their capabilities and to everybody according to their needs.
Right.
But that utopia only took care of the basic needs.
Yes.
So it was a quite economicist utopia.
Right.
Only taking okay, you can eat, you can dress yourself and sleep without taking the rain, and that's enough.
Right.
So it was an egalitarian utopia on the lower level, but with the technological advancement, with the scientific advancement, etc., we could maybe now, and even in 200 years, even more, think about a very better utopia that all the people should have according to their wishes,
right,
to their highest wishes.
Yeah, no,
Realize themselves, etc., etc. So this is a very much better utopia.
Well, yeah, no, I have to, at the risk of sounding like a communist, and we certainly have to be careful here.
And it is not a communist. It is not. It is any more a communist. This utopia that I am talking about is no more a communist utopia, because it take care of the excellence. Because of course, if we think about the wishes of all the people, they are very different. If we talk about the basic needs, they are the same. You need to eat and need to sleep and to dress. Okay, but if we think about the higher wishes, they are quite different. So this is not communism.
Yeah,
this is very much better.
I agree, and I think that the opportunity here is, especially with, as you say, now that we're in a technologically advanced society where, we're rapidly approaching a point where artificial intelligence and robotics are going to be handling, an increasing number of the jobs that humans are doing, frankly. And if you have your basic, in an ideal world, you have your basic needs met, then it's up to the individual to self-actualize, right? So you're not just worried about finding food or finding shelter. Yeah. You're now comfortable in that regard. So now you have an opportunity for self-actualization, for education, for exploring, what contribution can I make to the greater society? I think that I really like that that future. Now, whether that sort of morphs and transforms into what it looks like in the expanse, that's hard to say, and I guess that's always a possibility. I mean, I had heard, well, as we know, in the developed countries, the wealthier the society is, the fewer people are having children. I mean, in Russia, they can't keep. They're already having a crisis of a declining population. So there is another future scenario where the population of the world, especially if we can collectively and globally become wealthier, and everyone has the same opportunities as, say, developing countries do, you could see a leveling off of the population. Maybe it's not, maybe it's 10 billion people, and you're not seeing the exponential growth in population that we've seen, over the last 100 years or so. So that's one possibility that we could be looking forward to.
So, just to understand, you're talking about a possibility that the population of Earth becomes steady at around 10 billion people. This situation is remaining a closed system, our system remaining closed, or expanding into space?
Well, okay. Now let's bring in the space component here, and I remember a great presentation by talking about science fiction authors by Isaac Asimov, and I had invited him to speak to the New York Space Frontier Society meeting. I guess a year or two before he passed away. So this is about 1990. And I said, well, we'd like you to talk about space settlement. And one of the interesting things he said was that we're not going into outer space to relieve the population explosion on Earth. He said there's nothing that we can do about the population explosion. We can't send enough, especially in the near term, we can't send enough people into outer space to stem the growth or to affect the growth of the population. I thought that was very interesting, because that's one of the arguments that pro-settlement, space settlement people like to make, is that we're going to relieve the population growth. Because that growth is going to be, first of all, it's going to start off very slowly, and so it'll be, hundreds and then thousands and then millions of people. But even if you're sending off millions of people, against a population of 8 billion people, 7 to 8 billion people, it's not really making that big of a dent, So I think the slowing down of the population is going to have to go be to other forces, right? It might be resource limitations. I like to think that as people become more educated, they're going to choose to have 1 or 2 children each, and just give those 2 children, the best opportunities, like you see in the U.S. and Europe, and that will become more the norm globally. And then, but at the same time, you're going to see, and when you talk about self-actualization, you see the opportunities that are created from space settlements on the moon and on Mars, and people are going to want to make that adventure for themselves in their life. And at first, it'll be the intrepid explorers that will be in the thousands. But as the facilities get larger and larger, when I say facilities, the colonies themselves on the moon and Mars become larger and larger over the next 200 years, for sure. 200 years is a nice horizon. You'll see the flow of goods and services and people to these colonies will increase and become easier and easier. And, people will choose to go and not feel the sense of, they'll still feel a sense of excitement and adventure, but it won't be the sense of risk that they would be taking. So I feel excited about maybe moving to California from New York, but I know that I'm not taking the same kind of risk that, say, the early pioneers in America took going to the West and having to deal with all the all of the dangers that awaited them. So I think that will, and as it becomes easier, less dangerous, the flow of people who say, you know what, I'm going to make a new life for myself. Maybe what's here on Earth is not good enough for me. I want to make my life elsewhere, and I see that, and I see that's very critical because right now, I think that's part of our problem on Earth. Frankly, is that we have this pent up desire for striking out into new territories, but there's no new territories to strike out into. Yeah. And I think that that's creating a huge a collective psychological tension on the planet itself. If we can think of
what
the planet,
I call it the syndrome of the closed world.
that's a good one. Syndrome of the closed world.
Yes. Syndrome of the closed world.
Exactly. So you and I are on the same page in terms of understanding there's a collective consciousness on the planet that even if people may not consciously be aware of, but there's an undercurrent that thread that goes through the planet, and this tension is helping to push us to develop this economy in space that finally is maybe getting some traction with people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and so forth. And that will relieve this tension. And especially once populations are able to strike out to establish a permanent foothold on the moon and Mars and in free space in colonizations, that will relieve this tension. And hopefully that will be done. Hopefully that my expectation is, and I think your expectation is too, that will restore a kind of a balance, if you will, in the solar system, as people are able to have that kind of a freedom. There'll always be people that will choose to stay on Earth. The vast majority, obviously, will choose to remain on Earth. But we'll always have this outlet for people to strike out
If I can just make a couple of considerations, because you said a lot of very interesting things, and so I see the demographic process in a different way from how it was discussed, starting with Malthus, with the horrible thinking of Malthus, that see humans only as a mouth to be fed, and he doesn't take care of the intelligence. He only see the mouth. And I agree with Julian Simon that wrote people, the population, the ultimate resource. According to Julian Simon, people are always a resource, never a problem. But of course, people are a big resource, a great resource in an open system. In a closed system, too many people could become a problem, because there is not enough resources, material resources, not enough food, not enough energy, not enough water, etc. And we are approaching this kind of situation on Earth. Now we are almost 8 billion. And if we keep on growing in the closed world, then we run the risk of an implosion, a civilization implosion. If you look at the work of Paul Ziolo, for example, the professor Paul Ziolo is teaching at Liverpool University or Manchester, I don't remember. Okay. However, he is a psycho historian. He took the work of Isaac Asimov and made a discipline of study with that. So he said he make a diagram of the human evolution, and he says that now we are at three ways alternatives. I myself I say that we only have two, but he says that we have three. One is to make the jump to the stars, so to evolve to a solar society. No, not a monoplanetary society, a multiplanetary society. The other one is to go back, to have an implosion and go back to animal and quasi-animal status, and the third one is to remain steady as we are. In my opinion, this option it doesn't exist, because we only have two choices: or to expand or to regress. And I think that this age that we are living now, in this before 2030, 2050, is the very critical point. This is a break-even point, because if we keep on growing, only using space for Earth, and maybe now using the new technologies, the reusable rockets by SpaceX, and the additive manufacturing, all the new nanotechnology, all the new technologies, we only use these technologies to make new satellites, and we don't push to have manned industrial activities in orbit, in the cislunar space, etc. Then we run the risk, because we already have 7,500 tons of debris around us. And if we put other satellites without taking care of the maintenance of the recovering and everything, things could become very, very complicated, also from the, let me say, mechanical point of view, because we have a barrier around us that will prevent both the explorers and the settlers to go out. But however, okay, so my concept of the demographic process, sorry for the digressions here and there, is that we are decreasing now. Also, the fertility is decreasing, but the fertility decreasing will not stop the growth, however, up to the point that maybe it is already dangerous. And even if we stop growing and we go back the growing, that will be a disaster, however, because our civilization will be ended, will be decadent, will be a civilization of old people, society of old people, without new ideas, without anything. So to disinness. How is the English word for disinnescare? Let me look for that, because it is interesting with the Google translator. Just a moment. Diffuse. Disinnescare, the triggering, no? Even if we were able to diffuse the so-called demographic explosion, that would not be the solution, because we will implode. However, we will implode. So the solution is to open the system and to allow the growth to restart at another level. Of course, we are not talking about moving people from Earth to space. What I am, the process that I see is that there will be hope in the future again, when the system will be open, because we will be building infrastructures outside, etc. So this will excite the young people and create a new faith in the future, and new will to work and to study and to do everything. And so the outer space population will begin to grow up, and the earthly population will begin to not to the growth, but however not to growth anymore at the same pace as before, because there will be a balance, no? A balance in the expansion process.
That's right.
So this is, in my opinion, this process would be the best. Progressive expansion that reopen the hope in the future and allow people to fight with the problems, because however on Earth the problems will remain. We continue to have environmental problems, etc. But maybe not much resources problem, because using the resources of the solar system will solve some problems. So
let me
question, I will finish my interruption with one question. Is 200 years from now an enough horizon to appreciate some positive effects of the expansion? This is my question. And we don't see much of these positive effects in the expanse.
No, we don't. And I think
if not in some philosophy that come here and there out from the mouth of the characters, because we understand that these people are maybe a little bit better than us, because they think I think the authors tried to put something as of evolutive, evolutionary in this work, and it come out here and there.
Yeah, well, you brought up a bunch of points, but let me just start with responding to your last point. The expanse, the story of the expanse is, it is a novel, right? So it has to have a certain amount of drama, and protagonists and antagonists, and and that's what makes it a compelling story. I think from the technological standpoint, of the various settlements on the moon, Mars, and the planet, and the moons of Jupiter, and so forth, that is very feasible. And obviously, that's one of the most compelling things about the whole story, that you can see that within 200 years, we could pretty much be where that solar system, civilization could be. I tend to think that the just in a more truthful context, I tend to see the evolution of humans moving into space as being concurrent, or as occurring at the same time as there being a heightening of consciousness. And actually, if you've read Frank White's book, The Overview Effect, going into space can be a very transformative. What I was saying, I view just the act of moving into space it serves to expand and evolve human consciousness as a whole, right? So if you've read Frank White's book, he talks about, he interviews a series of astronauts about this, what he calls the overview effect, where astronauts have sort of epiphany and experience or peak experience in space, which transforms them in one way or another. And I think, frankly, even though there's only been dozens or a few hundred astronauts who have flown in space, I think those experiences have translated down to Earth and has helped us globally perhaps expand our consciousness to a degree. So my point is, as we look to build permanent communities in space, those individuals that are doing that are going to have a much more, I guess, mature attitude towards each other and towards the mother planet from which they came. And I tend not to think that we are at risk of, say, pitting Mars against Earth at some distant future. I'm not saying that couldn't possibly happen, but I like to think that, and it's not to say that there won't be issues and there won't be strifes and challenges for the communities up there, but I tend to think that somehow there'll be much less because people will be approaching the space experience and living in space in a much more enlightened, much more enlightened way. So that's that piece of it. I did want to address also what you had mentioned, sort of this next 30 years, kind of, you know, either we go into space or we decline. And there's two things going on right now, right? That are that on the one hand give us maybe some hope, and then the other hand make us really, really worried, right? So on the one hand, you have the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musks and the Bob Bigelows. So we have this strong interest in commercial habitats in space. So we've heard a lot about Bob Bigelow, but other companies are getting into the game. Even NanoRacks is talking about refurbishing an upper stage fuel tank to be used as habitats. And there are at least 2 or 3 other serious companies that are vying to be the provide habitat, on-orbit habitat capability once the International Space Station is decommissioned in 2024 or thereabouts. So that's kind of exciting. There's talk about in Europe, the European Space Agency is talking about the lunar village, right? So
yes,
where they want to get people to the moon, and they want to have, and it's great that they're actually calling it a village. So there's real potential there. So that's all on the exciting side, and on the other side, of course, what makes us worried in terms of devolving is the political side, the political concerns, where countries, instead of countries wanting to work together more, right? We're starting to see a fracturing where countries, particularly the United States, wants to turn inward into itself, right? So and that's what's under the Trump administration. And now hopefully he won't go very far in that process, but there are many people in the United States that say, listen, we just need to take care of ourselves. We can't worry about the rest of the world. And
yeah, America first.
And that's the first step, as you talk about, in marching backwards to some other, it's moving backwards in time. It's not moving forwards, right? So
yeah.
it's having the world connected together, working together as one big global human family. That's where we have been moving particularly over the last 70 years, since World War II. We don't want to retreat from that. And that's the concern. And hopefully this is just a temporary setback in that process, and our political system can right itself, and we can continue moving forward positively. So,
yes. Very, very interesting points too. And I think that while we have courageous entrepreneurs like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Robert Bigelow, and even the space tourism ones, that they are still working, also having some difficulties at the moment. However, I support very much them. I mean, Richard Branson and these people that are having big problems. But however, what I'm afraid is that the private entrepreneurs are doing their part, because they are developing launchers, they are developing concepts for space industrialization. Jeff Bezos is a very interesting plan, because he thinks to move all the heavy industrial factories to the space, and to have accommodations in space with Robert Bigelow. But there are a couple of very important scientific challenges that maybe nobody's tackling, is facing with the proper seriousness, that are artificial gravity and protection from the cosmic ray, the radiations. This is something that the private industry maybe is not enough to the task. So we should see the agencies. We should see NASA, ESA, Italian Space Agency, the French CNES, and DLR, and everybody, the Japanese, to seriously focus and concentrate to solve these two problems.
Right.
Protection
Well, now
from
you're
radiation.
talking about a healthy relationship between industry and government. You know, how can the two work hand in hand? You know, you want to leverage, you know, the fortunes of Bezos and Musk, and let them do what they're doing. But there's an increasing role with the government, but they have to work together and not against each other.
Yes.
Right? We're moving. We're finally in the U.S. We're finally moving. You know, beyond you know, government-dominated space program, where they're allowing and helping to support, you know, emerging new commercial space capabilities. They have to just continue that process. They have to go even further. And you're right. And it's up to the government to tackle the big issues, whether it's radiation exposure, you know, weightlessness, or helping to, or helping to develop artificial intelligence, artificial gravity capability, and so forth. You know,
so far these issues were not faced yet, because the exploration paradigm. In the exploration paradigm, explorers are military, so they are expendable, sadly. But if we think about bringing civilian passengers, civilian settlers, then we have to think in quite another way, even from the legal point of view. So we need a space law very, very quickly. We need to develop the space law. Maybe taking it from the maritime, the international waters law that says many things about the right to recovery and the property of something that you find. If you find something in the sea and you rescue it, it is yours, your property. It is not the same thing in space. If you take an old satellite that doesn't work anymore, and it is not yours, you can be charged because if you take it.
Right, and
so
it's interesting.
There are many things to develop, and I would like very much to see how can I say a focused effort to solve the scientific challenges, the legal challenges, and all what it takes to get there and to stay there and to settle there in 10 years, in between 2030.
Yeah, no, you bring up, well, you make me think of a couple of points. One is, you know, there's a lot of work going on right now as it relates to getting, you know, satellites, and to a certain extent, I'm sorry about that, to get satellites into orbit, and obviously people up to ISS. It's all very incremental right now. So the notion of putting any kind of large-scale facility on the moon that would house 100 or 200 people is not anything that's on anybody's sort of to-do list, right? But there are incremental, interesting developments going on. As a matter of fact, and this is where I'll make a plug for. I'm sorry.
Maybe something.
I was going to make a plug for SpaceCom. So this is the organization I work for. We put on a major conference in Houston, Texas. This year it's going to be December 5th through 7th. We do that in conjunction with NASA. We have a Space Act agreement with them. One of the interesting programs we're going to be exploring at the conference is debris mitigation and satellite maintenance. So we are starting to move into this era where companies are going to be putting up robotic satellites that can intercept other satellites in orbit, whether it's GEO or low Earth orbit, either refurbish them or push them into a deorbit, push them to deorbit to get them out of space, and it would allow for new satellites to be built not as robustly because they'll have the ability to be repaired periodically from these robot
yes.
things. So
I just wrote a newsletter. I don't know if you got it.
oh, you talked about that?
Yes, I'm talking about debris recovery and reuse, space debris recovery and reuse, and we should stop calling them debris. We should call them scraps, because on Earth we have the car crushers that take the old cars and crush them and get raw materials from that.
Oh, yes.
The same thing. We should have satellite crushers that take the old materials in orbit and reduce them to elementary powders useful for 3D printing.
Oh yeah,
and we should have yes. I focused two industrial activities in orbit that could be made better by human technicians than by, of course, supported by robotics tools. But however, if we will have workshops in orbit that can make debris recovery and reuse and satellites assembly. If we will assembly satellites in orbit, we can have very, very lighter satellites, because we can avoid all the mechanisms that deploy antennas. I mean, automated mechanisms that deploys antennas and solar panels. So if we will mount the satellites in orbit, you can avoid this kind of things. These are expensive things, because they have to be tolerant with the vibrations of the launch.
So that you're talking about the near-term developments that we really kind of need to make, right? It's those incremental steps that are inching us closer and closer to opening up the solar system. We have to deal with the debris issue.
Yes.
We have to. You touched on the next step, which is space manufacturing. SpaceCom will also be having a workshop on space manufacturing. Yes. And talk about satellite manufacturing, but also all sorts of other interesting things. So, we at the same time that we're talking about 200 years from now, and where all this is leading, we have to be, obviously we have to be grounded, and you and I understand this. You have to be grounded that there are very near-term issues that and developments that have to take place, and we have to deal with those one at a time, hopefully as rapidly as we can.
Yes. This is what I call a presentist vision, because we were futurists, but being futurist, unfortunately, meant to have a vision in the future, something that is not happening now, because now there are other things, and maybe in the future we will have that. Now we have to be aware that if we want to have a better situation in 200 years, there is something we have to do now, because if we don't do it now, we will never do it, because our situation will get jeopardized in several ways, and we run the risk that we don't have anymore the opportunity to make an evolutionary step. So the last question, I know it's a bit like a crystal sphere, but however, how many people do you think in 200 years will live in the solar system? How many billions on Earth, and how many billions outside?
That's a big question. I'll try to answer the question, but you have to get. Have you interviewed Jim Caravella of Offworld? He was formerly with Shackleton Energy. Very interesting character. Anyway, very dynamic speaker. But we were talking.
No, sorry, let me give you one more data. I'm sure you're aware of a plan of the ULA that foreseeing 1,000 people working in the geolunar space in 2050.
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't know if that plan is realistic, if it is pessimistic or optimistic. However,
Well, I'll tell you. Yeah.
think if we think that the expansion will begin really now, making some industrial activities in space and increasing, etc., etc. And we can think that maybe within this century, we will have an infrastructure in the geolunar space and something on Mars, maybe. But first, small settlement on Mars or around Mars, because this is another topic that we cannot face today, approach today, because the time should not be too long. But however, there is always the discussion between Kraft-Erike and O'Neill, what it was better, the moon or an artificial town that can rotate and can have artificial gravity, etc. But let it be by now. This argument we will not develop. However, if the expansion begin now and continue according to the ULA plan, in 2050 we will have 1,000 people working, and maybe at the end of the century we will have. We don't know, because you know how many changes happened during the last century.
That's right. That's right. So, actually, you bring up a couple of things. The Cislunar 1000 project. I'm actually involved with that thing. That ULA has sponsored a series of workshops. I actually went out to Colorado.
Oh,
and
wonderful!
I participated.
I would be very interested to that.
Yeah. I have some information. I'll share it with you that came out of that. That was, and actually that's where I was talking to Jim Caravella, bringing it back to him, and we were talking about, well, in 30 years, is 1,000 people sort of reasonable? And he said his attitude is we could have 1 million people in 30 years in space. So he's a very aggressive proponent and a very smart guy. So it's not coming from complete speculation. I do think that once we have the first settlement, and once we have all of the tools in space to build more settlements, meaning that we don't the building materials and the building infrastructure is not dependent at all from Earth. Once that happens, then I think all bets are off. The expansion will happen. Will happen just hugely, because we'll have you'll have the and I think that's the attitude that we should take when we start. When we build the first one, we shouldn't just build the first one. We should build the first colony with the notion of, okay, this colony is going to, how do we expand this colony? Or how do we, as soon as we're done with this, take the same tools and build the next one? That only makes sense. And I think that once we really get a foothold and get the hang of the construction process and the tools and so forth that we need, and we'll get better and better at it, it's certainly conceivable in 200 years to have 1 million people, but in 300 years, we could have a billion people, because the growth will just be exponential, and you'll just have thriving communities all over the solar system, and then we'll look back on this era that we lived, that our generation, and say, what were those guys waiting for?
Yes, I'm sure of that. I'm sure.
Right. So,
okay.
But we have to, we have to take the incremental steps, and that's really what SpaceCom is about. What are the near-term steps that we need to take to develop the economy? So we need an economic underpinning that can help to support not just the technological underpinning, but the economic underpinning that can support
and the
further and further.
And the political.
And political is important as well. And so, but I've always had the attitude that, well, it's also a good idea to look at space settlements and themselves and not be shy about developing scenarios or plans that what could a settlement look like? What would be the issues involved with sustaining a population of 1,000 or 10,000? Sort of hearkening back to Gerard O'Neill, right? So he's very much the godfather of the godfather of the space movement. He sort of asked those questions, and I'm a little concerned that we're not asking ourselves that question enough, and really doing some of the hard work like he did to say, okay, well, what would it take to put a colony on Mars to support a population of 10,000? What would that actually look like? What would it actually take? Elon Musk went to a certain length, at his famous speech at the with the IAAS meeting in Mexico. He went to a certain length talking about his Mars plan, but he his plan sort of stops when his colonists land on Mars, right? You don't really have a sense of, well, what's there waiting for them, and so, and at that bit of it, I think that there's a lot of opportunity there for researchers and think tanks to sort of to be spending time thinking about that, because as this capacity increases, for launch capacity increases and so forth, we're getting closer and closer to that time. And I do not think that it's too early for us to get the architects and the engineers and the designers and the agriculture experts and botanists and the all of those folks together, and the financiers and so forth together, to say, okay, well, what is this is the colony we're going to put on Mars, or this is the colony we're going to put on the moon. What will that look like? Let's design it. What are the components? What's the construction sequencing look like? What materials do we need from Earth? What materials can we use from space? And we're kind of doing that on a very small scale, which is good. We're doing that kind of research. But, let's scale it up. Let's not be bashful about scaling it up and really, really digging our teeth into it and seeing, what that's going to take. So I think the more we can sort of, more we can show people what these colonies could look like and how they would be built, and how the way O'Neill did, the more I think that excites people. And then, and then the more you can kind of, then you can kind of bring those future design plans, and connect them to our launch capabilities right now, and then maybe that helps to bring that future into a closer to the now. So anyway, that's
very, very fantastic discussion we had. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Steve. I keep on reading your wonderful book, and maybe we'll send some thought about that later.
I look forward to it.
Okay. So,
all right.
Thank you so much, and ad astra.
Okay. Ciao. I look forward to talking to.
Ciao.
Okay.
Ciao.
Bye now.